Let me tell you a story.
I joined the Conservative Party when I was 13 or 14 years old. I was excited by much of what Mrs. Thatcher was trying to do during the 1980s. I felt that I was always going to be a Conservative.
The year is 1997, and Nigel Farage is being interviewed ahead of the upcoming general election. Nigel isn't a member of the Conservative Party. Not anymore. He's quit and set up his own party, the UK Independence Party. This party is small and doesn't have much in the way of money, but its goal is simple: to pull the UK out of the European Union. Nigel is from good stock. His dad was a stockbroker and, despite being an alcoholic, was good enough at his job to pay for Nigel to go to Dulwich College, an elite fee-paying boarding school. From there, he'd graduated straight into the family profession as a commodities trader in the City of London. Nigel has always had right-wing sensibilities. A teacher at his school once suggested that views she described as fascist might be enough to bar him from becoming a prefect. And yet, for now, that doesn't matter. His disagreement with the largely pro-Europe establishment is a fairly technocratic one. His party is also, for all intents and purposes, completely irrelevant. If you live in Britain in the late 1990s, chances are that you know someone who's a member of UKIP, and chances are that person is a bit of an oddball.
Great Britain is set to be run permanently from Belgium, with the currency controlled from Germany. Now, what possible excuse can there be for such unmitigated lunacy?
There is no excuse.
When the election comes later that year, UKIP stands in 194 seats across the country and loses in every single one. Nigel himself is the only UKIP candidate who manages to clear 5% of the vote. He's forced to watch from the sidelines of the sidelines of the sidelines as the election is won by Tony Blair, a leader who believes firmly that Britain's future is very much in Europe. Nigel is, to put it simply, a political weirdo. A child of the establishment who's chosen to stand out in the cold. He's clearly passionate about his anti-Europe stance, but that stance is precisely what makes him irrelevant. The idea that he might one day reshape British politics is a fantasy. Now let me show you a different video.
We pride ourselves on having a legal system which is the best in the world, and we pride ourselves on the fact that we've all got free speech. But in reality, of course, that simply isn't the situation.
This is a clip from the critically acclaimed documentary McLibel, directed by Franny Armstrong and Ken Loach. It follows two activists who are locked in a £10 million legal battle with fast food chain McDonald's. Helen Steele and David Morris are being sued for libel, following their distribution of a leaflet in which the duo accused the fast food chain of various wrongs in relation to the environment, workers' rights and customer health. The case grips the nation, and for obvious reasons. It's David versus Goliath. It's citizen versus corporation. It's homegrown hippies versus American fast food. This framing is helped by the fact that Helen and David don't have much in the way of cash, and are thus having to represent themselves in court. That is, except for the occasional bit of pro bono support they receive from lawyers and legal experts who sympathise with their cause. One of those lawyers is a rising human rights barrister called Keir Starmer.
I immediately saw that McDonald's had a very strong legal team and that it was a complicated case raising all sorts of issues. And as soon as I saw the imbalance, I decided that I would do what I could to help them.
Keir is the perfect personification of the Britain that Tony Blair's new government wants to build. He's from, at best, a lower middle class background. His father a toolmaker, his mum a nurse in the NHS. When he studies for his law degrees at Leeds and then Oxford, it's as the first in his family to go to university. He seems like an embodiment of meritocracy, living proof that through hard work and formal education, anyone can rise to the top. Keir also has his principles. The McLibel case is a testament to that. There is, after all, little to be gained from his involvement with the trial. It's very likely that some of the accusations contained on the offending leaflet are unproven. McDonald's has also given Helen and David the option of simply apologising rather than going to court, an option they've refused. He's not even being paid. He's there solely in order to defend the principle that gargantuan, multinational corporations shouldn't be able to use the law to silence their critics. Keir's politics might be a bit to the left, but he's exactly the kind of person whom we're led to believe should become Prime Minister. He's very much not a child of the establishment, but he's managed to fight his way into it, and who knows where that could lead. Nigel and Keir are then polar opposites. Opposites, for now at least, in politics. Opposites in where they started in life. Opposites in where they're going. And they'll continue to be opposites for some time. One is about to find himself a persistent winner, securing every promotion, every goal, every election he chooses to go for. The other is going to be a laughingstock, a national punching bag. And yeah, while one will make history and reshape British politics forever, the other will leave only the lightest of fingerprints. Together, these men are going to break British politics. But we'll get to that.
If you vote for me, and if we topple the Speaker, we will send an earthquake through British politics that will tell them that we're not happy with being ignored.
It's 2010, and Nigel Farage is in Buckingham. He's once again running to be an MP. And this time, he's got a plan. He's chosen to stand in the seat which is currently held by Georgia Burrows, the Speaker of the House of Commons.
Order! 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 Order!
This is controversial. The Speaker of the House of Commons doesn't necessarily change just because a general election has been called. By convention, the main political parties thus don't field candidates in the Speaker's constituency to allow them to be re-elected as easily as possible. Breaking this convention is newsworthy, and so Nigel's decision to sign up as a candidate in the seat is primarily a stunt. Nigel has become quite fond of stunts. 13 years and 3 days since UKIP's drubbing in the 97 election, and things are looking up for the new party. Well, as up as they could. They even had an MP for a bit. That MP might have been a Conservative MP who defected rather than someone who was actually elected as a UKIPper. He might have been a slightly dodgy character who was later convicted of election fraud. And he might have quit the party again 7 months later. But hey, it's a start. Better still, Nigel and 10 of his UKIP colleagues have managed to bag seats in the European Parliament, which might seem a little ironic. 11 of the biggest haters of the European Union in the country now have to spend a good chunk of the year commuting back and forth between Brussels and Strasbourg. Nevertheless, Nigel will constantly use his presence in the European Parliament debating chamber as the basis for headline-grabbing stunts. A month before he challenges Burkow in the election, he makes the first of several appearances on BBC panel show Have I Got News For You? Nigel is clearly aware of the importance of being an evergreen presence on TV. Over the past 2 years, he's been a panellist on the BBC's Question Time no fewer than 6 times. His first foray into reality TV is a mixed bag. He spends the half-hour show being the unrelenting butt of the joke.
The former broker, Thatcher supporter and leader of UKIP, who likes his name to be pronounced Nigel Farage. So please welcome Nigel Farage.
I was going to say I thought he'd done very well, but I'd hate to agree with you. OK, what are UKIP's 5 pledges?
Straight talking. Straight talking. That's what you get.
That's two, yeah.
Nothing could be worse than election day, though. The day begins with narrowly averted tragedy when one final election day stunt ends in a plane crash. Nigel is riding as the passenger in a prop plane pulling a Vote UKIP banner when the plane loses control and crashes into a field. The day ends in farce, as Nigel not only gets fewer votes than John Burkow, but also John Stevens, a ludicrously posh candidate who is followed around town by a mascot called Flipper the Dolphin.
Can I shake you by the flipper, sir?
Nigel has made progress. UKIP manages a full 3.1% of the national vote. Skepticism towards the UK's membership of the European Union is on the rise, but they still fail to gain a single seat in Parliament. However hard he tries, Nigel's dogged commitment to this single political issue means that he's resigned to being little more than a political punchline.
We have concluded that there is sufficient evidence to bring criminal charges and that it is in the public interest to charge the individuals concerned.
It's 4 months earlier, and Keir Starmer is standing in the reception of the Crown Prosecution Service's head office in London. He's there to announce that the state will be bringing criminal charges against 4 members of Parliament who have been found to have fiddled their expenses. It's the high point of a scandal which has engulfed Parliament and taken the nation by storm. And, just as with McLibel, Keir has emerged as the adult who is here to sort out the mess. His role in this saga, however, is different. Just over a year previously, Keir took the decision to swap sides. He not only became a prosecutor, but stepped into the role of Director of Public Prosecutions, the person with ultimate authority over who does and doesn't get prosecuted for alleged criminal offences. The cases are almost all high profile, as is the role itself, which invites a new level of scrutiny. The right-wing press draws on his record in human rights law to complain about the appointment of the barrister who defended terror suspects, the man who's a disgrace to justice, or, as one blogger apparently put it, a soft, liberal, human rights lefty. Even one of his colleagues admits to having expected him to have been a prosecutor who was nevertheless actively anti-police. Keir's new job does give him the opportunity to continue his pursuit of some more right-on causes. He not only takes MPs to court for expenses fraud, but also pushes ahead to ensure that the racist murderers of 18-year-old Stephen Lawrence are finally prosecuted after 2 decades of justice being denied. Yet, Keir also has a clear desire to prove his critics wrong, to make any accusations that he's too radical for the task at hand hard to stick. And so, for reasons that some will call pragmatic and others a little bit pathetic, he begins to pivot on his principles. This previously dedicated critic of the use of state power suddenly finds himself repeatedly defending its most extreme deployments. He backs a decision not to prosecute the police officers who shot and killed Brazilian student Jean-Charles de Menezes at Stockwell Underground Station after they mistook him for a terrorist. He also declines to prosecute a police officer who knocked a newspaper seller, Ian Tomlinson, to the ground during a series of protests in London, despite that knock having led to Ian's death. The biggest departure from what once seemed like ironclad principles, however, is his response to the London riots. Just over a year after the 2010 general election, London is set ablaze. The shooting of Mark Duggan by armed police in Tottenham has led to protests which have devolved into riots. These disturbances soon spread across the country, and by the time the fires are put out, 5 people are dead, hundreds injured, and more than 1,500 arrested. As Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir suddenly has a lot of people to prosecute. And so he approves a plan for courts to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to deal with the surging cases. The riots end on the 10th of August, and by the 12th, 686 people have already had their trials and been found guilty. It's a risky business. Defense lawyers brought in to provide support for the accused will later describe the proceedings as kangaroo courts, which had little chance of dispensing anything approaching real justice. Children as young as 13 are being tried in the middle of the night. A 23-year-old student who has never before been in trouble and has stolen no more than £3.50's worth of bottled water in a moment of absolute madness ends up being locked up for 6 months. The whole affair is a brutal carnival of the power of the state. When Keir had first taken the job as DPP, the charge of his critics had been that he might change the role, that he might turn the Crown Prosecution Service soft. But by the time his term comes to end in 2013, there's a sense that it's the role which has changed him. Which might seem like an insult. But the deeper he worms his way into the establishment, the more that flexibility comes to be viewed as an asset.
In the name of Oog the Beneficent, the Merciful, all praise is due to Oog, for he is Lord of all the worlds. I want to thank you all for electing me for MP tonight, and my reign will begin from today. Fuck Broadstairs. Oog Akbar!
It's the night of May 7th, 2015, and they're counting votes in Margate Winter Gardens. It's the 7th time that Nigel has tried to gain a seat as an MP, and he's decided to stake his career on it. He's promised his fellow UKIP members that, should he lose, he'll quit as party leader. There's no sign of Flipper the Dolphin, but there are plenty of other novelty candidates on offer. Nigel doesn't only need to defeat Craig Mackinlay of the Conservative Party, who currently holds the seat, but also comedy character Al Murray, the pub landlord, Zebediah Abu Obadiah, a devotee of Oog the Beneficent, and a candidate for the We Are the Reality Party, which for some reason is led by Bez, the maraca-wielding dancer from the 1980s rave band The Happy Mondays. The difference this time around is that it's Nigel himself who is the draw for these candidates wanting to stand in this particular constituency.
It's seen as a fun bit to try and pour water on his big moment by lampooning him and the entire process.
He might still be a joke to many, but the fact that he's a popular joke is at least progress.
The belief that he might win the seat is an entirely reasonable one. Over the past couple of years, all his stunts and TV appearances have begun to pay off.
12 months previously, his party had done something unthinkable.
They'd managed to finish the European Parliament elections of that year with a larger vote share than both the Conservatives and Labour. In the local elections held on the same day, UKIP had netted a respectable 21.6% of the vote in the wards that it contested.
Perhaps even more impressively, in the months since that upset, the party has even managed to gain 2 whole members of the UK Parliament.
Both are, granted, defectors from the Conservative Party, but both voluntarily submit themselves to by-elections in which their constituents enthusiastically back their changes in allegiance. The accepted wisdom is that the UK's 3-party system has now become a 4-party one.
As important as what Nigel and his party have achieved, however, is how.
Nigel's more technocratic disagreements with European political integration have gradually been subsumed by a much broader anti-establishmentism and anti-immigration narrative. The country is still suffering in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, and while blame might more accurately be placed at the feet of Nigel's ex-colleagues in the City of London, he works hard to pin the blame on immigrants.
So much of what he and his team are doing appears to be working. All of the narrative winds are blowing in his favour. And then, at the very final hurdle, Nigel's place as the outsider's outsider trips him up once more.
UKIP collects an astounding 12.6% share of the national vote, making it the 3rd most popular party. That support, however, is spread too thinly across the country. Nigel's 3.8 million votes converts into just 1 MP, and that MP is not him.
He tries to put a good face on his defeat. But there's a good reason to wonder whether his strategy of working outside the main 3 political parties might not have been so clever.
It is such a privilege to be the MP for Overton Counties and to follow in the footsteps of the legend Frank Dobson MP.
Back in London, and Keir Starmer is also stood on stage. It's 5 AM in the Somerstown Sports Centre, and Keir has just learned that he's to be the next Labour Member of Parliament for the constituency of Holborn and St Pancras. He's won a seat in Parliament on his very first attempt.
That being said, Keir's victory was very much a foregone conclusion.
Holborn and St Pancras is the safest of safe seats. The area has returned a Labour MP at all but one election since the 1950s. It's a stereotype of metropolitan Britain. Throw a dart in Keir's patch and you hit a national cultural landmark. The British Library, the British Museum, King's Cross Station, Seven Dials, Hatton Garden, Camden Town, Bloomsbury, the London Review Bookshop. It's Disneyland for the liberal elite.
The Labour Party's decision to gift Keir the seat also comes with a promise.
The plan is that, should the party win the next election, Keir will be made Attorney General, effectively the government's lawyer, which would have made for a fairly straightforward transition from his previous role. Yes, he would have been an elected politician rather than a bureaucrat, but he would have been the most bureaucratic version of an elected politician going. The safety of the seat, and Keir's being given it despite zero political track record, means democracy isn't exactly playing a starring role here. This is that post-Blair vision of supposed meritocracy in action once more.
When it comes to it, however, the promise of the Attorney General job is never tested.
Despite all polling being in their favour, Labour don't only not win the election, they actually lose seats. Ed Miliband, the leader under whom Keir had been expecting to serve, resigns. And while the expectation is that the man the Murdoch press had christened Red Ed will be replaced by someone from the party's broadly neoliberal centre-right faction, the subsequent leadership election is won, instead, by veteran left-wing agitator Jeremy Corbyn.
To say that Jeremy's election is a tense moment for the Labour Party is an understatement.
Despite winning a mandate of nearly 60% of party members and supporters, Jeremy's fellow members of Parliament view him as an anachronism.
His colleagues will spend the next 4 years in more or less open revolt, constantly briefing against him and attempting to frustrate his leadership in any way they can.
It's a particular upset for Keir. He was expecting to walk pretty much straight into a job at the top of government. If that post-Blair vision of meritocracy were to be believed, this should have been his moment.
And yet, this man who has spent more than half a decade moulding himself into a creature of the establishment has found himself in a decidedly anti-establishment party.
Jeremy's politics are all about taxing the rich and taking on vested interests. He's been a frequent opponent of many of Keir's decisions as DPP.
In fact, it's not just that the Labour Party is under new management, it's that entire post-Blair technocratic vision of politics, which Keir is an embodiment of, has just exploded before his very eyes.
Suddenly, politics appears to be a domain of antagonism, not just administration.
All of which means Keir's new principles are about to be tested.
That's it. The trouble is, the further forward...
Gosh, you're all being much politer than Bob Geldof was yesterday. I'm very pleased about that.
It's a year later, 16th of June 2016, and Nigel Farage is stood in a quiet square just around the corner from the Houses of Parliament. He's still not an MP, but he is leader of the UK Independence Party again. His promised resignation was apparently refused by the party, in a move that can either be interpreted as a farcical way of Nigel keeping his promise and his job, or a reflection of the extent to which Nigel effectively is UKIP in the eyes of most of the public.
While UKIP is keen to keep Nigel around, however, the rest of the political establishment continues to keep him at arm's length. Which might seem strange.
Because after more than 2 decades of campaigning, Nigel's great political goal is in sight. The Prime Minister, David Cameron, has agreed to an in-out referendum on Britain's continued membership of the EU. Despite his continued failure to win an actual seat in Parliament, UKIP's successful gobbling up of vote share has proven too much to handle. David's assumption is that the referendum will end with the country backing Remain, and that Nigel will be revealed to be the fringe oddball that many have always assumed him to be. That the whole referendum effectively exists to defang Nigel's political ascendancy, however, means that even establishment supporters of the UK leaving the EU continually try to freeze him out of his own pet project. The official Vote Leave campaign is dominated by senior figures from within the Conservative Party, such as Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, who attempt to claim the cause as their own, all of which leaves Nigel scrambling for attention. That Boris and co might want to keep their distance from Nigel is perhaps understandable, and not just because they don't want to lend any inadvertent support to UKIP. The reason that Nigel is stood in that quiet square just around the corner from the Houses of Parliament is in order to unveil a new poster that he's had designed, which will prove to be a lightning rod for controversy. Emblazoned with the phrase "breaking point," the poster features a photo of a group of migrants in Slovenia, implying that Britain's membership of the EU is enabling mass immigration into the UK.
It's not subtle, but this expert in political stunts isn't known for his subtlety.
All good political logic suggests that the poster should spell disaster for UKIP, the Leave campaign, and for Nigel. It openly stokes fear of non-white bodies and brings to mind the worst examples of fascist propaganda. It seems to confirm every accusation that UKIP is more than just an anti-EU party, but an out-and-out racist one.
And yet, Nigel's position on the periphery turns out to be a superpower.
Not being part of the official Leave campaign gives Nigel license to continue to lean into rhetoric which is far more right-wing and anti-migrant than Boris or Michael might promote. The official campaign is able to stick to the more respectable yet boring economic arguments while still benefiting from the outright nationalistic sentiment being stoked by Nigel.
And it's a master play.
The Leave campaign's victory is not a large one, but it's a victory nonetheless. Nigel has everything he ever wanted.
The dawn is breaking on an independent, united kingdom.
And it turned out he didn't need to be an MP to get it at all.
Disastrous night for Labour, isn't it? How much responsibility do you take for the results?
Good morning, everybody.
Mr. Corbyn, what's
Good morning, everybody.
Mr. Corbyn?
Good morning, everybody.
Can you stay on as leader, Mr. Corbyn?
3 days after the referendum and everything is on fire.
At least for Keir.
A good chunk of his colleagues have decided to use the loss of the Brexit referendum as an opportunity to try and oust Jeremy Corbyn and get the Labour Party back under the management of the sensible centrists. The excuse for doing so is that Jeremy has supposedly been a bit lacklustre in his contributions to the Remain campaign, which the overwhelmingly EU-loving Labour MPs suggests makes the loss his fault. Over the following 2 days, more than 50 shadow ministers, shadow junior ministers, and others resign from their roles in Jeremy's team. The goal is to make it impossible for him and his allies to fill all the required roles, and thus to force him to resign. As the battle lines are drawn, Keir finds himself suddenly having to do politics, and his response is a revelation. See, Keir does join his centrist comrades in resigning, but he does so noticeably late. It's hard to get across the extent to which this is a major moment in British politics. Multiple news outlets are running live blogs. Keir, however, only makes his principled decision to resign a full day after the attempted coup is done and dusted. It's like trying to place a bet after the race is already run. Even so, it soon turns out he backed the wrong horse. See, the resignations do prompt a leadership election, but that election results in Jeremy Corbyn actually increasing his support among the Labour Party membership. The centrists have found themselves at an impasse. Many Labour MPs choose to oppose Jeremy's left-wing leadership from the backbenches. Others quit the party entirely. Keir takes a different approach. He gets on board. Maybe finding himself in a party of troublemakers rather than technocrats has reawakened something in him. Or maybe moving to the left is simply the pragmatic, centrist response to the political centre moving in that direction. It's hard to say which version of Keir Starmer is at work. But whatever clashes and disagreements he might have had with his colleagues during this time, Keir gets well and truly stuck into the Corbyn project. Anyone looking through the archive for footage of Keir laughing and joking with Jeremy and the rest of the team needn't look hard. He's a high-profile member of this set too. Jeremy assigns Keir to the role of Shadow Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, making him the party's key spokesperson on Brexit at precisely the moment that Brexit is all anyone wants to talk about. It's also about to bring him toe-to-toe with Nigel, but in the strangest of possible ways.
I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to set up a party. You are here today at the birth, at the launch of a new force in British politics. Welcome to the Brexit Party.
It's April 2019 and Nigel Farage is launching a new political party, the Brexit Party. Which might seem odd for two reasons. Firstly, because the last time we saw him, he already had a political party. And secondly, because Brexit has already happened. Or kind of. See, Britain might have voted to leave the European Union, but what exactly that means is still up for question. Will the UK cut ties with its European neighbours entirely? Will it leave the political aspects of the bloc while staying in the trading bit? Will it leave both but sign a new trade deal? Nigel had initially viewed the win as a win. Less than a month after the referendum, he stepped down from his leadership of UKIP, for good this time. The goal to which he dedicated much of his life was, as he saw it, complete. What use would there even have been in becoming an MP now? He'd soon go further. In the wake of the referendum, his ex-party finds itself at a loss for direction. UKIP had successfully used fear-mongering about immigration to get Britain out of Europe, but with that task complete, Islamophobia and anti-migrant rhetoric is all the party really has. Nigel very much lit that fuse. But in late 2018, things get so bad that he opts to completely rescind his membership. It's perhaps the one time in his entire political career that he lets the optics of being seen as too far right lead his decision-making. But just as it looks like Nigel might be about to disappear into the ether for good, he returns with a vengeance. Standing on a makeshift stage in an industrial park in Coventry, he announces the launch of the Brexit Party. He tells those gathered that he's returned in order to hold the government's feet to the fire. Prime Minister Theresa May, who had campaigned for Britain to remain in the EU during the referendum itself, simply can't be trusted. And so the Brexit Party will be on hand to ensure that she can't sell the country short. Nigel's return quickly ends Theresa's career. Just over a month after he mounts that stage in Coventry, his new party manages to come out on top in the country's final elections to the European Parliament, with 30.5% of the vote. A frankly ridiculous thing for a brand new party to do. Several times during May 2019, polling shows the party to be more popular than either the Conservatives or Labour. Nigel begins to talk about the Brexit Party as being more than just a protest group, but a genuine government in waiting. And then Boris happens. When Theresa resigns as Prime Minister, it might seem like a victory for Nigel. But she's soon replaced by fellow Brexiteer Boris Johnson. And just as quickly as it rose, Nigel's polling begins to fall and fall. His commitment to the most extreme form of Brexit, no matter the consequences, just isn't that unique anymore. When an election is announced for that December, Nigel begins to scramble. On the one hand, here is his best chance yet to not only lead the political conversation, but command actual power in Parliament. On the other, splitting the pro-Brexit vote would be to risk everything he's achieved. He tries to arrange a pact with Boris, but Boris is the leader of the most successful political party in the modern world. He doesn't need Nigel's help. Nigel reluctantly agrees to stand down his candidates in more than 300 seats. The move helps Boris sweep to power, and Britain officially leaves the EU not long after. Nigel hangs around for a bit, but with no Brexit to fight for, his party's relevance wavers. Not even a rebrand to Reform UK can save it. That Nigel has changed British politics for good is certain, but the party system has proven too strong to make a dent in. So, he decides to cash in on his outsiderness.
It's right that Parliament has the first say, but if we need to break the impasse, our options must include campaigning for a public vote, and nobody is ruling out Remain as an option.
If we want to pinpoint a moment in which Keir's run-in with Nigel becomes inevitable, it's perhaps here, on the penultimate day of the 2018 Labour Party conference in Liverpool. And not because his plan for a second referendum on membership of the EU has any chance of becoming a reality, but because this is the moment when Keir Starmer begins his campaign for leader of the Labour Party. Although not explicitly. See, Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party hadn't quite been the electoral disaster that many had expected. The party didn't manage to win the first election that it faced under Jeremy's leadership, but amid expectations that its unashamedly left-wing manifesto would be firmly rejected by the British public, it had managed to gain both seats and votership. There is a sense fizzing around the conference that a left-wing government might be possible in Britain. The party is less sure what to do about Brexit. During the referendum, the party had officially backed the UK remaining in the EU, but many of its traditional voters backed leaving. The party's membership is pretty split too, and the leadership appears to have opted for an approach of allowing the Conservatives to tear themselves apart over the issue, whilst Labour focuses on domestic issues of inequality and public services. All of which is a nightmare for Keir. When he takes to the stage for his big conference speech, his task of providing clarity on the Labour Party's Brexit policy is not an easy one. What he does have is an agreement on the part of his colleagues that, given the narrowness of the Leave campaign's victory, it might make sense in some circumstances to offer any potential exit deals up to a public vote. And then he decides to add a detail of his own.
And nobody is ruling out Remain as an option.
Keir hadn't previously been a particularly passionate campaigner for a second referendum. If anything, he'd been the opposite, using his experience in law to try and design a workable strategy for leaving. Perhaps this was a sudden burst of principled objection to Brexit. Or perhaps he'd realised that pivoting once more might enable him to get his career back on the track that he'd expected it to be on when he first got elected. The concept of a second referendum, with cancelling Brexit on the ballot, proves to be extremely popular, just not with enough people. It's catnip to those who still believe in the technocratic order which runs through Keir's veins, but for a lot of people, the idea of spending even more years arguing about Brexit sounds dismal. It certainly doesn't help his party's chances at the polls that they found themselves under sustained accusations of anti-Semitism. But with Boris promising to get Brexit done, the party is absolutely annihilated. Which, by all rights, should have marked the end of whatever political ambitions Keir might have had. And yet, he's about to emerge looking better than ever.
A white person has a black accent, that's considered to be a crime. You know, they should be cancelled.
It depends in what context. If you're taking a piss, then you're taking a piss. But if you're not, then you're not.
So you can't, sort of can't win territory.
Nah, it just depends on the context.
You know, it's rather like, you know, you go to a fancy dress party, dressed as something, and now
The press will say it's cultural appropriation.
It's November 2023, and Nigel Farage is taking part in the 23rd series of the ITV reality show I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. The series involves a group of around 12 celebrity contestants competing for votes from the public whilst living in a camp in a jungle in Australia. Their main method of winning people over is by performing a series of embarrassing and disgusting challenges for viewers' entertainment. On just day 2 of the contest, Nigel finds himself eating a pizza topped with camel, sheep and cow nipples.
A camel udder.
Wow.
And a sheep udder with a cow's teat.
There's nothing.
Did you prepare this yourselves, guys?
Not personally, no.
We can't take all the credit.
It might seem like a fall from grace, but the show has a reputation for being a good way to launder one's reputation, particularly for politicians.
Just the series before, disgraced former Health Secretary Matt Hancock had used his time in the jungle to try and win the public back after he was revealed to have been cheating on his wife.
While he was Health Secretary. In a pandemic.
Despite the fact he ran off to film the show when he was meant to be in Parliament, a bit of basic humility and self-deprecation helped him to leave the show in 3rd place.
Taking part in the show is perhaps less out of the ordinary for Nigel. He does like a good stunt after all.
But his decision to do so is no doubt helped by the fee. Nigel is paid a record-breaking £1.5 million for his participation. That's over 7 times the salary he would have earned for being an MP.
And he does well. Or mostly.
His time in the jungle ends up being a brutal mirroring of his political career, seeing him get to the final 3, only to then be beaten by the baddie from the Rocky spin-offs and a guy from Made in Chelsea.
And yet it helps him achieve what appears to be his new goal, becoming an influencer.
Which is perhaps Nigel simply embracing the role he's always been playing in one sense or another. After all, even as a member of the European Parliament, Nigel's never really done much in the way of politics. He submitted no motions, no reports, and no amendments. He had one of the worst attendance records in the whole chamber.
And so why even bother pretending? There are plenty of other ways to change people's minds, particularly in an age so replete with opportunities to reach people.
It's no massive leap for him to try his hand at news broadcasting. And so, when insurgent far-right news channel GB News launches, Farage signs a contract to man a self-titled evening show. Like the rest of the channel's broadcasting, the production is shoddy. It looks like it's produced in the drama studio of a regional FE college by well-meaning if rarely competent students.
But perhaps that's because all the money's wound up in Nigel's pocket.
It will later be revealed that he's pocketing more than £1.2 million a year from the show.
That being said, how much influencing he's actually doing remains to be seen.
The show is by far the most popular show on GB News, with more than 50,000 regular viewers. But GB News fails to compete with existing, higher budget news channels. By December 2021, it's stuck with just 0.2% of UK viewership share. Nigel has a little more success on TikTok, where his freshly minted account climbs to more than 1 million followers, yet it's his videos for the website Cameo which become particularly notorious.
Sigma, Sigma on the wall, who's the skibbidiest of them all? Wagwan Ted, you sussy jungus! Sigma, Sigma Spider, climbed up the skibbity spout. Here's to Kieran, he's true blue. He's a reformer through and through. Yes, it's me, Nigel Farage. I've also caught wind of your impressive 400-day mewing streak.
Oh no, Lottie Lyon has been kidnapped by the sus EU bureaucrats.
You have no riz.
Soon, Nigel is by far the most watched British politician on the internet. But he's also raking it in.
His Cameo recordings will later be revealed to regularly rake in more than £10,000 per month. That's on top of the occasional bit of YouTube and X income and a couple of £100,000 from a SponCon deal with a bullion dealer.
With gold, whatever profit you make is 100% exempt from capital gains tax.
And yet, it's not entirely certain whether, as The Guardian puts it, viewers are listening or laughing.
The whole thing is hopelessly low rent.
But hey, as the saying goes, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. And then you start doing cringy cameos and they start laughing at you again.
You have no riz.
I want to pay tribute to Jeremy Corbyn, who led our party through some really difficult times, who energised our movement, and who's a friend as well as a colleague. And to all of our members, supporters and affiliates, I say this: Whether you voted for me or not, I will represent you. I will listen to you. And I will bring our party together.
It's April 2020, and Keir Starmer has just been elected leader of the Labour Party, which is a turn-up. And not only due to the crash and burn of his second referendum policy. See, both Brexit itself and subsequent support for folks like Nigel and Boris have repeatedly been framed in the media as a result of the down-to-earth English regions against a perceived London-centric liberal elite. And Keir is the Member of Parliament for the actual British Library. When Jeremy Corbyn resigns as Labour leader, the received wisdom among the media class is that his successor should be a woman from outside London and the South East. Most of the candidates who put themselves up for the job tick at least one of the necessary boxes: Lisa Nandy, Rebecca Long-Bailey, Emily Thornberry. The very minute Keir puts his name in the ring, however, the criteria appear to bend to accommodate him. Keir's pitch is simple. He presents himself as, in some respects, an heir to Jeremy, publishing a list of the progressive pledges, which he says maintain the party's radical values and are informed by what he calls the moral case for socialism. Where he distances himself from the Corbyn project is in his supposed media savvy. In fact, the implication is that he might be able to use his pragmatic approach to get left-wing policies enacted. And it works. In April 2020, in the depths of the first COVID lockdown, Keir is announced as the new leader of the Labour Party, and thus the party's next candidate for Prime Minister. His pitch of socialism with an electable face, however, doesn't last long. Just 2 months in, Keir sacks Rebecca Long-Bailey, one of his former colleagues and leadership election rivals, from his shadow cabinet. The charge is one of anti-Semitism, albeit a pretty flimsy one. Rebecca's tweeted a newspaper article in which the actor Maxine Peake has, among many other issues, briefly discussed the Israeli military training US police. Just 4 months after that, Keir suspends Jeremy Corbyn from the Parliamentary Labour Party entirely, following a statement in which his predecessor condemns anti-Semitism, whilst also suggesting that accusations of anti-Semitism have been leveraged against him for political purposes. A report commissioned by Keir himself will later conclude that this was very much the case. But it's too late. Jeremy will never sit as a Labour MP again. This defenestration of people who Keir now sees as his political opponents is fascinating to watch. Perhaps you agree that the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn was anti-Semitic to its core. Perhaps you wouldn't go that far, but think it was a necessary PR move for Keir to distance himself from such accusations. But whether pragmatic or principled, Keir's pivot to decrying the previous leadership of being deeply anti-Semitic involves him kind of pretending he wasn't there. He also quickly begins to pivot on policy. The 10 pledges which propelled him to the leadership are quietly abandoned. They gradually morph over the next couple of years into 5 missions, which are much more milquetoast. Opportunity for all, clean energy, safer streets. The sheer vagueness of it all doesn't just disappoint lefties who thought they were backing the more radical version of the former lawyer. 6 months before the announcement of the 2024 election, polling company Savanta asks what word people are most likely to use to describe Keir, and the most popular response is boring. And yet, behind the scenes, Keir appears pretty pleased, because his perceived tediousness contrasts with a Conservative government which is compelling to watch for all of the worst reasons. Keir ends up outlasting 3 Tory Prime Ministers, all of whom leave office in some form of disgrace. After 13 years of pretty chaotic Conservative rule, the country appears to be crying out for change. And when Rishi Sunak announces a general election will be held on the 4th of July 2024, that is exactly what Keir offers up. The slogan of change might be vague as hell, but that's kind of its appeal. When, on the 4th of July 2024, Keir Starmer strides into the Willingham Close Tenants and Residents Association Hall to cast his vote, then he's feeling pretty positive about everything that's to come. This was supposed to be it. This could have been it. Order restored. After the derailments of the Jeremy Corbyn years and the chaos of Brexit, Keir Starmer's ascendancy to the prime ministership is interpreted by some in the media as a sign that pragmatism, technocracy, and measured sensible centrism is back. The darkness represented by Nigel and his ilk has been cast out. It only helps to confirm this narrative that Keir's victory seems to mirror that of Joe Biden, who's managed to return 2000s-era liberalism to the White House a few years earlier. Keir's victory even seems, on paper, inarguable. With 411 out of a possible 650 seats in the House of Commons, his promise of change has gifted him the fourth largest majority in Parliament ever.
This perpetual winner had won yet again.
But Keir and Nigel's fortunes are about to flip,
and all of this will quickly begin to seem like little more than a dream. Let's switch things up a bit and start with Keir.
It's not that Keir hadn't set himself up for success. In fact, his victory had been the result of remarkable planning. The number of actual votes the Labour Party had received hadn't changed all that much from the previous election, with Keir increasing Labour's vote share by just 1.6%, which isn't to say that there isn't a genuine mood for change in the air. But what Keir has managed to do is achieve an exceptionally efficient election campaign, securing just the right number of votes in just the right towns and cities to turn that tiny swing in support into a massive swing in seats. Aware of the infighting which had frustrated Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party, Keir has also worked to eliminate any and all opposition from within his own party by effectively banning left-wing candidates from standing and replacing them with those perceived to be loyal to the Starmer project.
Once in power, however, exactly what the Starmer project is becomes foggier than ever.
But even with his hands firmly gripped around the levers of the state, Keir continues to recede from revealing any central guiding belief. This becomes most shameless in matters of foreign policy. After Joe Biden is replaced by a resurgent Donald Trump, Keir has to regularly appear in press conferences alongside a man who represents exactly the kind of chaotic populism he despises.
And yet, he opts to bend the knee.
This includes the former human rights lawyer defending Israel's cutting off of power to Gaza, and despite later criticising the country's ongoing genocide, defending the export of UK-made fighter jet parts to the offending state.
Things are similarly muted when it comes to domestic policy.
Less than a month after taking power, Keir's Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, stands up in the House of Commons and purports to reveal a hitherto unknown £22 billion black hole in the nation's yearly finances, left, she says, by the previous administration.
Exactly how secret this black hole had ever been is uncertain. But to Keir and his team, it provides a useful opportunity to do, well, even less than they'd promised.
His government doesn't quite become one of absolute austerity, and yet neither does it seem genuinely confident about its willingness to invest in the country and its people. The much-needed upgrade to the country's crowded rail network, which had been cynically cancelled by the Conservatives, remains cancelled. A cap on child benefit payments, which is widely considered to have increased child poverty, remains in place. There are some movements towards delivering a manifesto pledge to build 1.5 million homes, but housing policy remains tied to a broken model of private builders, poor quality homes, and steadily inflating prices.
Where fresh investment does come is in the form of increased military spending.
Keir announces a £13.4 billion hike in defence spending. He orders new nuclear weapons and the planes to drop them. As cuts are made to welfare spending owing to an apparent lack of funds, the cap on arms spending seems to have no limit.
In fact, what counts for a job strategy is increasingly also largely built around the arms industry.
More than anything, however, Keir seems to dedicate as much of his time as possible to telling the nation how he's going to smash the gangs profiting from asylum seekers crossing the English Channel. He shares videos of immigration raids and tweets endlessly about deportations.
The light progressivism and promises of investment in public services which were made during the election campaign are replaced by a small c conservatism of fear and loathing.
One wonders what that rising human rights lawyer would think. And yet, as Keir sees it, this is just another pragmatic pivot.
Because while he might have all but destroyed the Conservative Party during the general election, he's now found himself face to face with a challenger who's been stalking him for quite some time.
He has challenged me to a head-to-head debate sometime between now and the next general election. I'm very, very happy, Prime Minister, to accept this invitation, but I don't really want to wait for 4 more years.
See, there was another contributing factor to Keir's election win, which quickly turned from a blessing into a curse.
Nigel had initially ruled out running as a candidate for the Reform Party in 2024.
He'd handed over the leadership to fellow pro-Brexit multimillionaire and former property investor Richard Tice, another true man of the people. It perhaps seemed easier to simply cash those cameo checks and enjoy the show. It's with just a month to go before the election that he changes his mind. The management structure of the Reform Party is, at the time, slightly odd. Where the Labour Party and Conservative parties require leaders to be elected by their members, as one might expect, Reform is effectively a limited company whose shareholders are free to pick whoever they would like. With Nigel owning 53% of the company's stock, that effectively means that he has complete control. When, on the 3rd of June, Richard announces that he will be stepping down to allow Nigel to resume his post as leader, then the truth is, he probably didn't have much choice.
I can't let down those millions of people. I simply can't do it. It'd be wrong. So I have decided, I've changed my mind. It's allowed, you know. It's not always a sign of weakness. It could potentially be a sign of strength. So I am going to stand in this election. I'll be launching my candidacy at midday tomorrow in the Essex seaside town of Clacton.
Nigel announces that he'll be contesting the seat of Clacton, a small seaside town on the Essex coast, which might seem like a random pick, and yet it has a history of supporting his political vision. It was Clacton which had elected one of UKIP's first elected MPs back in 2015. And so, if this 8th attempt at breaking into Parliament is going to be successful, Clacton seems like the place. Nigel's campaign is the complete opposite of Keir's. Where Keir seeks to keep his promises as vague as possible, Nigel is spoiling for a fight. This strategy of division occasionally comes back to bite him. The very day he launches his candidacy, he gets a milkshake thrown over him whilst leaving a Wetherspoons. But this is a man who is able to transform any publicity into good publicity.
My milkshake brings all the people to the rally.
Keir might want to believe that his 2024 election victory was a thumping win delivered by savvy electoral strategy. The polling, however, tells a different story. The year leading up to voting day had seen a steady and then rapid decline in support for the Conservative Party. And yet, it wasn't Keir who was picking up those votes. The key beneficiary was Nigel's Reform Party. This would have been bad enough for the Conservatives in any event. But the UK's first-past-the-post electoral system means that in many constituencies it works to split the right-wing vote between the Conservatives and Reform, allowing Labour to waltz in and pick up those hundreds and hundreds of new seats. When Nigel finally manages to win his seat in Parliament in Clacton, then it might seem bittersweet. Electoral calculus has once again made it impossible to convert significant popular support into seats. Reform manages to claim just 5 spots in the House of Commons. And yet, this time, something has shifted. Because the Conservatives haven't just lost an election, they've been absolutely demolished. A disastrous 14-year stint in government has completely delegitimised them in the eyes of the public. When, after the election, polling begins to show voter share reuniting under a single right-wing party, then it's no longer the former most successful political party in the modern world which is the beneficiary. It's Reform. Better still, in an age of political disaffection, Reform is also able to sweep up voters who previously might have voted Labour, promising a revolution in the way the country is governed. Reform may only have a handful of actual seats. Keir may technically be a Prime Minister with a historic majority, but just a year into his premiership, pollsters reveal that if another election were to be held that day, Reform would sweep the country, picking up 290 seats and beating Labour down to just 126. Just over a year has now passed since the 2024 general election seemed to show that the technocratic order that Keir is the very personification of appeared to have taken back control. And the UK is now staring down the barrel of perhaps its most right-wing government ever. Let me show you one last video. Even 2 years ago, if I had asked you who had posted this video to Twitter, there would have been no doubt that the answer was Nigel. But you've probably already guessed by now that I'm going to tell you it was Keir. I think it's tempting for many liberals to read the intertwining tales of Keir and Nigel as the story of one politician who failed and failed and failed until he didn't, and another who consistently succeeded until he suddenly lost. And yet there's a difference between being in office and being in power.
Keir's victories have only ever really been technical. He might have had the election results and job titles and chauffeurs, but the political trajectory of the UK through the course of his adult life would likely have horrified that young civil rights lawyer.
Nigel's career might officially have been one of failure, but even if he doesn't win the next election, he's pretty much got everything he ever wanted.
It's perhaps easy to recognise how Nigel has broken British politics. It's perhaps harder to acknowledge how Keir and the centrist politics which he represents has contributed to that failure too. Politicians who, like Keir, no doubt started out with good intentions and who would like to have thought of themselves as a bulwark against ugly right-wing extremism, and who have nevertheless gradually come to embrace so many of its elements.
This is, they would surely argue, a pragmatic move in service of some greater good. But as progressive policies continue to be few and far between, what exactly that greater good is remains to be seen.
More than this, it seems only logical that voters should struggle to back a group of politicians who don't seem to know exactly what they believe themselves, let alone be able to convince us of those beliefs. Politicians who are the polar opposite of that principled lawyer we met at the beginning of this video. There's an irony to the fact that their hollow pragmatism should run aground on the rocks of a man whose political strategy has relied precisely on not bending his principles for anyone.
Which would be funny if the consequences for the country weren't likely to be quite so bleak. In fact, finding ways to act on our principles in a world where it feels like the political structures which surround us are deeply unresponsive can be hard.
That's what inspired my friends at Planet Wild to develop a new way of supporting vital conservation and rewilding projects by partnering with different organisations every month and documenting it all here on YouTube. This is possible thanks to the Planet World community, consisting of around 13,000 people supporting these projects to visibly restore and rewild our planet one step at a time.
Think of it like crowdfunding for the environment.
Every month, the community pools its resources to support a different project. Last month, they helped indigenous communities in the Amazon rainforest to protect the area from loggers and fires and avoid damage to this crucial planetary resource. This month, they're rescuing endangered grey seal pups in the northern Baltic and releasing them back into the ocean.
I've been a member for a while now, and what I think is really special is the dedicated, in-depth but fun video reports that the team makes to accompany each project.
This details how the Planet World community's money has been spent that month and the difference that it's made. More than just ensuring transparency, it helps you to feel a much deeper connection to each project, and provides an opportunity to learn both about some of the really specific challenges facing our planet and the inspiring work that activists and experts are doing on the front lines to meet those threats. If you'd like to join the Planet World community, there's no set amount of cash that you have to contribute. You can give as much or as little as you can.
In fact, I will cover the first month of the first 100 people who sign up using my code TOM8, that's TOM and then the number 8, so that you can get a taste of this unique way of putting your principles into action and feeling just so much less powerless. You can either scan the QR code that's on the screen right now, or click the link in the description down below to start making an impact in less than 30 days and see your principles transformed into action. You can also watch the video report on their latest project up here on the info tab, which is floating above my head right now.
Thank you very much for watching this video. All that's left for me to do is to say a massive thank you to my top tier supporters over on Patreon, who are Richard, Gary, Dick on Spain, Bill Mitchell, ZC Reese, Zoe Alden, Alexander Blank, Neil Zabildgaard, Sophia R, Sergio Suarez, Richard Rapoon, Amit Singh Parahar, Gabriel Koch, Jimmy Dunn, Fiasco Linguini, Agent Maxwell, Glenn Sugden, Emil, Jarabar, Yillamson, Paulius Edicus, Sam Fortunato, Sanjay Yarsanjeen, and Scott Foster. The support that those people provide really is essential for allowing us to continue to make videos like this one. So if you want to find out how you can join them, whilst also getting access to copies of the scripts to my videos, early looks at stuff that I'm working on, a weekly-ish blog in which I update you on what I'm working on and how things are going, then you can find out how to do so at patreon.com/Tom Nicholas. Thanks so much for watching once again, and I'll see you in the next video.